The car that promised everything and delivered confusion. When you hear Maserati, you think Italian luxury and exotic design. When you hear Chrysler, you think American comfort and value. But in the late 1980s, Chrysler tried to mix both worlds, and it ended in disaster. This was the Chrysler TC by Maserati, a name so long and strange it already sounded like a mistake. But the idea behind it? Ambitious. Chrysler wanted to build a luxury roadster that could compete with the Mercedes SL, the Cadillac Allante, and even entry-level BMWs. Something classy, stylish, and powerful, with a touch of European elegance. So Chrysler's CEO at the time, Lee Iacocca, made a bold move. He partnered with Maserati, not just because of their engineering, but because of personal connections. Iacocca and Alejandro de Tomaso, who owned Maserati, were longtime friends. It felt like the perfect match. American muscle meets Italian flair. But right from the start, the TC was headed for trouble. The plan was complicated. Chrysler would design the base, send it to Italy. Maserati would add their touch, then send it back to the US for finishing. That meant shipping parts across the Atlantic more than once, costing time and a fortune. Worse, the car that finally arrived looked familiar, too familiar. You see, while the TC was being developed, Chrysler had already released the LeBaron convertible, a cheaper, good-looking car that shared almost everything with the TC. The shape, the size, even some of the same parts. So when the TC hit showrooms in 1989 with a price tag nearly double the LeBaron's, buyers were confused. Why pay more for a car that looked nearly identical to one already on the road? Chrysler tried to explain. The TC had hand-stitched leather seats, real wood trim, a removable hardtop with circular porthole windows. They even offered a special engine, a 2.2-liter turbocharged four-cylinder built by Maserati with a 16-valve head designed by Cosworth. Sounds exciting, right? But there were problems. First, the engine wasn't very powerful. Even though it was hand-built, it only made about 200 horsepower, and it wasn't available with an automatic transmission, which most luxury buyers wanted. The other engine options were even worse. A base Chrysler-built Turbo 4, or a Mitsubishi-sourced Ver6, that felt completely out of place in a supposed Italian-American luxury roadster. And reliability? Let's just say, mixing two completely different engineering teams across continents didn't go smoothly. Parts didn't always fit. Service was difficult, and dealers had no idea how to explain what this car even was. It wasn't sporty enough to be a real sports car. It wasn't luxurious enough to beat the Germans. And it wasn't unique enough to justify the price. Even worse, the TC arrived 2 years later than planned. By the time it hit the market, the competition had already moved on. Buyers looking for upscale roadsters were choosing the Mercedes SL or BMW C3 Toy. And if they wanted American luxury, they were going with the Cadillac Allante, which had its own issues but at least looked and felt premium. Meanwhile, Chrysler's own LeBaron was stealing the TC's customers, offering 90% of the look for half the cost, with fewer maintenance headaches. In total, Chrysler only sold about 7,000 TCs over 3 years. It was a massive failure. The project had cost millions, and instead of elevating the brand, it became a punchline. Even Lee Iacocca, who had pushed so hard for the TC, rarely spoke about it after its flop. The car was discontinued in 1991, quietly. No big farewell, no second chance. Just a forgotten footnote in automotive history. But here's the part that really stings. This car didn't fail because it was completely bad. It failed because it tried to be everything and ended up being nothing. It was overpromised, overpriced, and underwhelming. And it wouldn't be the last time Chrysler tried to reinvent itself with an awkward partnership. In the next chapter, we dive into what happened after the TC, and how its failure haunted Chrysler's next big luxury experiment. Because if you think the TC was a bad mix of cultures and brands, wait till you see what came next. The aftermath, the regret, and the repeat mistakes. The Chrysler TC by Maserati was quietly pulled off the market in 1991. No fanfare, no farewell edition, and no real attempt to fix what went wrong. But the damage wasn't just financial. It was something deeper, a trust problem. People looked at Chrysler differently after the TC. It was supposed to be their big move into luxury, their moment to say, "We can play with the Europeans?" Instead, it looked like a company pretending to be something it wasn't, and customers knew it. But here's where it gets worse. Chrysler didn't really learn from the TC. In fact, just a few years later, they did it again. Only bigger. Only bigger. In 1998, Chrysler merged with Daimler-Benz in what was supposed to be a historic partnership. The press called it a merger of equals. Chrysler called it a new era. But if you looked closely, it felt a little too familiar. A big American brand tying itself to a famous European company, promising advanced engineering and global prestige. It was the TC playbook all over again, just at corporate scale. And the result? Chaos. The merger ended in disappointment. The cultures clashed. The companies didn't blend. And while a few good cars came out of it, like the Chrysler 300, the marriage fell apart. By 2007, Daimler sold off Chrysler, and history had repeated itself. It's almost like the TC was a warning sign. A preview of what happens when a company chases image over substance. But let's go back to the TC one last time, because buried in that failure are 3 huge lessons. And they're not just about Chrysler, they're about car companies in general. First, you can't force a badge to make a car desirable. Putting the word Maserati on a Chrysler didn't make it luxurious. Real luxury comes from engineering, quality, and experience, not branding. Second, timing matters. The TC came out 2 years too late. If it had launched in 1987, maybe it would have been exciting. But by 1989, it looked dated, underpowered, and overpriced. In the car world, being early or late by even a year can make or break a model. And third, know your audience. The TC wasn't built for any specific customer. Sporty drivers didn't want it. Luxury buyers didn't trust it. And Chrysler loyalists didn't understand it. When you tried to please everyone, you often pleased no one. That's why the TC was doomed from day one. Not because it was ugly. It wasn't. Not because it was slow. Some versions were decently quick. And not even because of bad intentions. Chrysler really thought it was building something special. It failed because it was confused. It wanted to be American and Italian, sporty and refined, exotic and familiar. And in trying to be all those things, it lost its identity. Even today, if you find a TC by Maserati at a car show, it draws a crowd. Not because people admire it, but because they're puzzled. What is this? Why does it exist? How did this happen? It's a reminder that no matter how big the name, no matter how glossy the marketing, a car still has to earn its place. On the road, in people's driveways, and in their hearts. Chrysler tried to cheat that process, and the TC paid the price. Now, more than 30 years later, it's remembered not as a classic, but as a cautionary tale.